The rain began before dawn, soft at first, like someone testing forgiveness. By sunrise it had deepened into a gray wall, swallowing the horizon where the Coyote Plains met the low hills. Each drop struck the dry earth with a hiss, as though the desert were arguing with heaven. The wind carried the scent of wet sage and old iron. Out near the broken mill, a man worked in the storm, bare to the waist, his breath misting in the cold. Greyhawk Tanner's back glistened like carved stone beneath the rain. 60 years had turned his body into a map of endurance, scars crossing his shoulders, each a story no one asked about anymore. His white hair, long and heavy, hung against his neck. He moved slow but sure, hammering a new post into the mud where his fence had given way. The thunder rolled behind him like distant drums. He did not look up. To the town of Coyote Plains, he was a ghost that refused to fade, a half-Apache giant who had once hunted men for the cavalry and then turned his back on both sides. They said the rain followed him wherever he went. Children dared each other to throw stones at his empty cabin. Women crossed the street when he passed, whispering that he had buried 3 wives beneath that windmill. Greyhawk never corrected them. Rumor was safer than truth. He paused to rest, leaning on the hammer. The earth was soft beneath his bare feet, the mud curling between his toes. A lifetime of silence had hardened him. Even the rain could not wash it away. His horse, Ghost, a lean gray creature with ribs showing through its coat, stood nearby, unmoving, as though both man and beast had accepted that solitude was the price of peace. Then from the ridge came the low creak of wagon wheels. Greyhawk turned, blinking against the rain. Down the slope rolled a small wagon, its driver hunched beneath a soaked bonnet. The horse pulling it looked more spirit than flesh, and yet the driver urged it onward, determined. Greyhawk watched with quiet irritation. Visitors never brought anything but trouble. The wagon lurched to a stop at the gate, and the woman climbed down. She was younger than he expected, late 20s maybe, but the rain blurred her features, softened the outline of her round body wrapped in a faded shawl. She steadied herself against the wagon, her hands trembling but her chin high. "Mr. Tanner?" she called. Her voice wavered, caught between nerves and resolve. "I was told you needed a cook. I can work for fair pay. Or room and board if coin's tight." Greyhawk said nothing. The hammer hung at his side. He could smell wet flour and bread dough from the covered baskets in the back of her wagon. The scent twisted something deep in him, something he'd forgotten, hunger that wasn't just for food. The woman tried again. "My name's Delilah Vance. I bake. I clean. I don't talk much if a man prefers quiet." Her tone had a practiced steadiness, the kind that comes from being refused too often. Greyhawk's voice came low, rough from disuse. "Who told you that?" "The storekeeper in town. Said you live out here alone." "He talked too much," Greyhawk muttered. Delilah hesitated, rain dripping from her bonnet. "So do most folks. I'm used to it." She turned as if to leave, shoulders rigid. The wagon's wheel caught in the mud, refusing to budge. Greyhawk watched her struggle, small hands gripping the rim, boots sinking deeper with each push. He waited longer than decency allowed, testing her stubbornness. When she didn't quit, he walked forward through the rain and set one massive hand on the wheel. With a single push, it freed itself from the rut. Delilah looked up at him, then really looked. His chest rose like a mountain before her, his skin bronzed and scarred, hair clinging silver to his neck. His eyes were pale gray, washed out like rain clouds that had seen too many storms. "Thank you," she said quietly. He grunted. "You shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you," she replied, surprising him. "But we both are." The corner of his mouth almost lifted. "Almost." She glanced toward the small cabin behind him. Smoke struggled from the chimney, pale and thin. "If you don't need a cook, I'll find another place," she said, gathering her shawl. "Just thought you might want bread that's not burned black." Greyhawk frowned. He hadn't eaten proper bread in months, just dried meat and bitter coffee. Still, he said, "Don't need company." "I don't aim to be company," she said softly. "Just useful." A gust of wind tore through the field, whipping her skirt against her legs. The rain thickened again, relentless. She stood there, trembling but unbroken, her hair dark with water, her eyes, hazel, patient, steady on his. Behind her, thunder cracked so close it shook the ground. Ghost snorted and pulled against its rope. Greyhawk looked at the horse, then at her. Some choices come not from wanting but from weariness. He stepped aside from the gate. "You can stay in the loft till the storm passes." Delilah's lips parted as if she hadn't expected him to yield. "I'll earn my keep," she said quickly. "You'd better," he replied, turning back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire was near dead, the air smelling of ash and rain-soaked timber. She followed quietly, setting her baskets by the hearth. Her hands were red from cold. She knelt and began to feed the fire small twigs, careful, gentle. Soon the room glowed again, warm flicker dancing across his rough-hewn table, his tools, the worn photograph pinned to the wall, a woman and child long gone. Delilah noticed but said nothing. He watched her work, the way her round arms moved with quiet precision, the way she hummed under her breath, a tune faint as smoke. When she stood, the room felt smaller, more alive. "Thank you," she said again without meeting his eyes. Greyhawk only nodded. He wasn't sure whether he'd done her a kindness or invited trouble to stay. By dusk, the rain softened to a drizzle. She had baked the last of her dough on his iron skillet, rough bread, uneven but fragrant. He ate in silence while she mended a tear in her skirt with borrowed thread. Neither spoke of the townsfolk, though both knew what they'd be saying by morning. When she rose to climb to the loft, she paused at the door. "You live far from town," she said softly. "Doesn't it ever get lonely?" He looked up from his plate, chewing slowly. "Lonely's a word for folks who ain't earned their quiet yet." Delilah studied him for a long breath, then smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a word for someone waiting." Her steps creaked on the ladder, the sound small and steady above the fire. Outside, the rain began again, lighter now, like whispers between leaves. Greyhawk sat staring at the door long after she was gone from sight, his hand resting unconsciously on the scar that crossed his chest, an old wound that had never healed right. From the loft, her voice drifted down, soft, uncertain, singing a hymn too old to name. It wove through the room, mixed with the smell of warm bread and wet cedar, and for a moment the cabin didn't feel like exile. It felt like pause, like something holding its breath before becoming something else. He set his plate aside and rose to shut the door against the wind. Through the small window he saw the lights of town flickering far off, faint as regret. He wondered what lies they were telling tonight, about him, about her. Ghosts stirred outside, restless. Greyhawk reached for his rifle out of habit, then stopped. The world was quiet except for rain and song. For the first time in years he felt the ache of not wanting to be alone. He looked toward the ladder where she slept above and whispered to no one, "You should have kept going, girl." But he didn't mean it. When the thunder came again, it sounded almost like a heartbeat, slow and heavy, as if the sky itself were waiting for something to change. Morning came slow and silver over Coyote Plains, the kind of light that looked borrowed from another world. The rain had stopped, but its ghost still lingered, dew heavy on the grass, fog rising in soft curls from the earth. From the loft window, Delilah watched it quietly, her hands folded around a chipped mug of coffee that tasted more like smoke than comfort. Down below, she could hear Greyhawk moving, boots on wood, the slow rhythm of a man who had no one left to rush for. She had woken before dawn, baked 2 loaves from what was left of her flour, and set them by the fire. It wasn't much, but it filled the cabin with warmth and scent, like memory itself had turned tangible. Greyhawk didn't speak when she set the bread on the table. He just sat, tore a piece off, and chewed like it was a sin to admit he liked it. "It's soft," he said at last, voice gravelly. Delilah smiled faintly. "That's the idea." He nodded once, then went back to eating. She'd learned already that his silence wasn't cruelty, it was armor. Still, each word he gave her felt like a small victory, something fragile she dared not press. By noon, the clouds thinned to a pale blue, and sunlight spilled across the land, bright and sudden. The world steamed, puddles hissed away, the mill wheel creaked back to life with the wind. Delilah stepped outside to hang her wash, the skirts of her faded blue dress whipping gently in the breeze. She caught her reflection in the metal bucket, round face, damp curls, soft arms that had never learned to be small. In town her body was an easy joke. Out here there was no audience, no laughter to flatten her spirit. Only the hum of insects and the smell of wet pine. Behind her the hammer struck again, steady, sure. Greyhawk was fixing the shed, the muscles in his back shifting under the morning light. He worked without shirt or shame, as if his body belonged entirely to the elements. Every motion was careful, deliberate, like prayer disguised as labor. Delilah watched for a moment before returning to her laundry. She told herself she wasn't staring, but her cheeks warmed all the same. When she brought him water, he looked at her briefly, nodding his thanks. "You work hard," she said. "Work's all I got left," he answered. She hesitated. "Then maybe you've been working too long alone." He didn't reply, just drank, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the plains blurred into sky. That afternoon a rider passed on the road, A boy from town, maybe 16, hat too big for his head. He slowed his horse just enough to stare. "They say you're living with him," he called, grinning through crooked teeth. "You married, miss?" Delilah flushed, clutching her apron. "Get gone," she said quietly. Gray Hawk appeared in the doorway behind her, a shadow taller than any fear. The boy's grin died instantly. He kicked his horse into a gallop and vanished down the road. Delilah turned, heart still beating hard. Gray Hawk was already walking away. "You didn't have to scare him." "He needed scaring," he said simply. She followed him inside. "They'll talk worse now. They already do." Something in his tone made her fall silent. She sat by the fire, hands twisting in her lap. "You don't care what they say?" "I did once," he said after a long pause. "Long enough to know it don't matter." Delilah looked at him across the small room, the scars across his arms, the steady, unreadable face. "Maybe not to you," she murmured. "But to someone like me, it still hurts." Gray Hawk looked up, then really looked. "Someone like you?" Her throat tightened. "A woman who doesn't fit. A woman folks laugh at or pity. I thought moving out here might change that." He stared into the fire. "It don't change. You just stop listening." She almost smiled. "And you're good at that?" "Best there is." That night, when the rain returned, soft and patient, she found herself humming again as she mended his torn shirt. He sat by the window, carving a piece of cedar, his knife catching the dim light. The rhythm of it, the scrape of steel, the patter of rain, her quiet song, felt like something close to peace. When she finished sewing, she folded the shirt carefully and set it beside him. "For tomorrow," she said. He nodded without looking up. "Thank you." Delilah lingered by the fire. "You ever think about leaving here? The mill, the rain, all of it?" "No reason to." "No reason to stay either," she said softly. Gray Hawk's hand paused mid-carve. "Some things hold you even when you don't see the chains." "Like what?" He met her eyes. "Memory." The words settled between them like smoke. Over the next days their rhythm deepened. Work, bread, quiet conversation. She learned to read his silences, to know when to leave him to his ghosts. Sometimes she'd find him by the river, staring at the water until dusk. Once, she caught him touching the photograph pinned above the mantel, a woman with dark hair and a small boy. Delilah said nothing, only placed a fresh loaf beside him that evening and let the smell of baking fill the room where grief lived unspoken. In town the gossip grew sharper. The preacher's wife told anyone who'd listened that Delilah Vance had given herself to that savage. A boy at the general store had mimed her shape, puffing out his cheeks until laughter filled the room. She said nothing, just took her flour and left, her face cold with shame. When she returned that night, Gray Hawk was mending the fence again. "Bad day?" he asked quietly without turning. "They think I'm wicked," she said, voice breaking. "You care too much what the small-hearted think." "I care because they're all I've known," she whispered. "And they've never let me forget it." He looked up then, the lines of his face softening. "The world's full of people who see others only to measure them. You don't owe them sight." She blinked back tears. "You make it sound easy." "It ain't," he said. "But it's worth doing." The wind picked up, lifting strands of her hair. He reached out without thinking and tucked them behind her ear, a simple gesture, rough and tender at once. The touch burned through her like sunlight. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he stepped back, almost startled by his own softness. "Storm's coming," he muttered. "I know," she said. "Let it." That night, thunder rolled across the plains again. The storm pressed against the cabin walls, whispering through the gaps in the wood. Delilah lay awake in the loft, listening to the rain and the sound of his boots pacing below. She could feel his restlessness, the same unspoken ache that lived in her chest. When silence finally came, she crept halfway down the ladder. Gray Hawk was sitting by the dying fire, head bowed, the carved piece of cedar in his hands. It was a small bird, unfinished, delicate beneath his calloused fingers. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Didn't hear you. I couldn't sleep." He gestured toward the bird. "Used to carve for my boy. He liked to hang them in trees. Said they'd scare the crows away." Her heart caught at the word boy. "The picture, was that him?" He nodded slowly. "Him and his mother. Marisol. Fever took them both." "I'm sorry." He shrugged, though his voice thinned. "Was a long time ago. But not gone," she said gently. He met her gaze, and for the first time his silence cracked. "No, not gone." Delilah crossed the floor and sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his skin. She didn't speak, she just sat, her hands folded in her lap. Outside, lightning flickered, painting their faces in silver light. After a long while he said, "You could still go back to town. Find someone younger, softer spoken." "I'm not looking for someone," she said. "Just a place that feels like mine." He studied her face, the steadiness, the lack of fear. "And you think this place is that?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'd like to find out." He exhaled slowly, setting the carving on the table. "You bake like my mother did. Burned the first dozen loaves she ever made. Still swore it was the fire's fault." Delilah smiled. Maybe it was. For the first time he smiled too, brief, uncertain but real. The cabin felt different after that, lighter somehow. In the days that followed, the world beyond their small clearing began to intrude. Riders passed more often. Smoke from the town rose thicker, restless. Delilah sensed something coming, trouble gathering like storm clouds on dry air. But for now, she chose to stay inside the small circle of peace they'd built. One evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon, she saw him standing by the river, staring west. She walked down quietly, the hem of her dress brushing wet grass. "You'll wear out that view," she said. He glanced at her, trying to see if the rain's coming back. "It always does," she said. He nodded. "Like ghosts." "Like forgiveness," she corrected. He looked at her then, eyes glinting in the fading light. "You think such a thing exists?" "I have to," she said. "Otherwise, what's the point of bread and mornings?" He laughed once, low and rough. "You talk like a preacher." "No," she said softly. "Just a woman trying to believe she isn't a mistake." The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of rain. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. So instead he did the only thing that felt honest. He reached for her hand. It was warm, trembling. She didn't pull away. The first drop of rain struck his arm. Then another. The storm was returning as it always did, but this time neither moved for shelter. They stood there, two souls washed in silver light, hands joined like a promise they weren't ready to speak aloud. Later that night, back inside, he found the carved bird sitting on the table. Delilah had tied a small ribbon around its neck, blue, torn from her own dress. Beside it lay a single note, written in careful, uneven letters, for the crows and the ghosts. He stared at it for a long time, the firelight catching the corner of his eye, before looking toward the loft where she slept. The storm outside deepened, thunder distant but steady. He felt the weight of something shifting inside him, not love yet, but the faint memory of what it felt like to hope. He reached out and touched the carving. It was smooth beneath his fingers, alive in its stillness. Outside, rain whispered through the grass, carrying voices from the town, the faint echo of hooves, the distant bark of dogs. Gray Hawk turned toward the sound, his face hardening. Something was coming. He blew out the lamp, the cabin falling into darkness. In the quiet, her ribbon glowed faintly in the ember's light, a soft blue flame against the wood, like the first sign of dawn before the next storm. The rain came back with a vengeance, thick and relentless, drumming against the cabin roof like 1,000 small fists. By morning, the plains were a gray ocean of mud and wind. Smoke from the mill's chimney rose straight into the storm, defying gravity, defying sense. Inside, Gray Hawk Tanner sat at the table, his hands rough and still, the uneaten bread before him growing cold. Delilah stood by the hearth, tying her shawl tighter around her shoulders as if she could keep the world outside from finding its way in. The peace they had built over weeks, fragile as glass, warm as firelight, was breaking. Word had reached them the night before, a robbery on the El Paso trail. A mail coach ambushed, 2 men killed, gold missing. And someone in town, someone with a tongue sharpened by envy, had sworn they saw a big Indian-looking man near the creek that same day. Gray Hawk had not left the mill in 3 sunsets, but truth was never a requirement for judgment in Coyote Plains. Now even the rain seemed to whisper accusation. Delilah spoke first, her voice small. "You think they'll come?" He didn't look up. "They'll come." She moved closer. "You could ride east, cross the river. No one would follow in this weather." "I'm done running," he said simply. "Did enough of that for half a life." Outside, thunder cracked so loud it shook the window. She jumped, pressing a hand to her heart. He rose and crossed to the window, peering through the blur of water. Shapes moved out there, for maybe 5 riders on the ridge. Slow. Careful. His jaw tightened. "They're here." Delilah's breath caught. "You don't have to fight them." Gray Hawk turned to her, and for the first time, his calm faltered. "They think I killed men for gold. If I don't stand my ground, It becomes truth by sunrise. She shook her head, tears pricking. But you could die proving what they won't believe. He reached for his rifle, slinging it across his shoulder. The motion was smooth, practiced, inevitable. Better to die honest than live a ghost again. Her voice broke. You promised peace. I promised nothing, he said, softer now, regret flickering behind his eyes. But I'll keep you safe. He stepped onto the porch. The rain hit him like baptism, cold, cleansing, cruel. Delilah followed, her skirt heavy with water, her shawl darkened to near black. The riders emerged from the storm. Sheriff Lyle Carson leading, his slicker glistening, his face half hidden beneath his hat brim. 3 deputies rode behind him, rifles visible, expressions uncertain. Morning, Tanner, the sheriff called, voice cutting through the rain. Heard you been doing more than baking bread up here. Greyhawk said nothing. Lyle dismounted, boots sinking into the mud. We had a coach robbed. 2 good men dead. Gold gone. Folks say they saw you near the trail. Greyhawk's eyes narrowed. Folks lie easy when it's my name. Maybe, Lyle said, smiling thinly. But lies don't matter much when the town's scared. Fear's louder than truth. Delilah stepped forward, trembling. He's been here every day since Tuesday. I can swear it. The sheriff glanced at her, his smile widening. I ain't surprised you'd swear for him, Miss Vance. Seems you've taken a liking to lost causes. The deputies laughed, low and mean. Delilah's cheeks flushed. Greyhawk's voice turned to stone. You best leave her name out of this. Lyle tilted his head. Or what? You'll shoot your way through the law? Again? The wind howled, flinging rain sideways. Ghost, the horse, stamped nervously in the corral. I never shot a man who didn't draw first, Greyhawk said. Can't say the same for you. Something ugly crossed the sheriff's face. He drew his revolver slowly, savoring the moment. Then maybe today's the day. Delilah moved before Greyhawk could. She stepped in front of him, arms spread wide, rain streaming down her face. Don't, she pleaded. Don't do this. You know him, Lyle. You know he's no thief. Lyle's eyes flicked toward her. You think he's a saint? He's half a savage living on stolen land. Greyhawk's breath came sharp. And you're a coward wearing a badge. The words cracked like lightning. Lyle's gun went up. Time slowed. The world shrank to breath and rain and distance between hearts. A single shot exploded, thunder folded into thunder. Greyhawk staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Blood bloomed bright against his skin, washing down in the rain. Delilah screamed and caught him as he fell to one knee. You shot him, she cried, voice raw. You damn fool, you shot him. Lyle's hand trembled slightly as he lowered his weapon. He reached for his rifle. No, she hissed, her body shielding Greyhawk. He reached for courage, something you've never owned. The deputies shifted uneasily. The youngest, a boy barely grown, looked away, shame coloring his face. Greyhawk tried to rise, his breath ragged. Let it go, Delilah. But she didn't move. Instead, she reached for the rifle that had fallen beside him. The weight of it surprised her, heavy as her heartbeat. She lifted it, not at Lyle but toward the sky, and fired once. The echo rolled across the plains, carried by the storm. Enough, she shouted. No one else dies here. The sound of her voice, raw and sure, froze them all. Even the rain seemed to pause. The deputies exchanged glances, the unease thick as fog. One finally spoke. Sheriff, we ain't got proof he did it. Maybe we should head back. Lyle's jaw tightened. You questioning me? The deputy met his gaze. I'm saying this ain't justice. It's pride. For a long, tense moment, no one breathed. Then Lyle holstered his gun. Fine, he spat. But if I find out you lied for him, girl, you'll hang next to him. He turned, mounting his horse. The posse followed, their silhouettes fading into the downpour until only the rain remained. Delilah dropped the rifle and turned back to Greyhawk. He was pale, blood mingling with mud beneath his knees. She pressed her hands against the wound, tears streaming. Don't you dare die on me. He grunted, the faint ghost of a smile tugging his mouth. I've lived through worse. Not with me you haven't, she said, voice shaking. The cabin felt miles away, but she helped him inside, one arm around his waist, her strength fueled by fear. He sank into the chair by the fire as she tore strips from her skirt to bind the wound. You're bleeding too much, she whispered. Bullet went clean through, he said through gritted teeth. I'll mend. She looked up, eyes fierce. You think this is about mending? They hate you, Greyhawk. They hate what they can't name. He reached up, his hand brushing her cheek. Let them hate. You can't change what folks choose to see. Her tears fell freely now, mixing with rainwater and blood. Then I'll be the one who sees you right. The storm outside raged harder, wind howling through the cracks. Greyhawk leaned back, breathing slow, his face lined with exhaustion. She sat beside him, refusing to move. The fire crackled, its warmth trembling like hope. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't have stood in front of me. I had to, she said. You saved me from small cruelties. I just returned the favor. He smiled faintly. You got fire in you, girl? I've been cold long enough, she replied. He closed his eyes, the tension easing from his body. The rain began to soften, its anger spent. Outside, the plains shimmered silver in the flickering firelight. Delilah watched him until his breathing steadied. Then she rose, stepping to the window. In the distance, through the thinning curtain of rain, she saw torchlight moving along the ridge, slow, steady, deliberate. Her blood ran cold. They hadn't all gone. She turned back to him, heart pounding. Greyhawk, she whispered, but he was already half asleep, face pale in the glow. The light outside wavered once, then vanished into the storm. She stood in the dark, listening to the last of the thunder fade, knowing peace had never been further away. The gun lay at her feet, slick with rain, and outside, the wind carried voices that promised the storm wasn't done. Not with them, not yet. Dawn came pale and trembling over Coyote Plains, washing the soaked land in gray light. The storm had broken, leaving the world stunned and shining. Puddles mirrored the wounded sky, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet ash and pine. Inside the mill cabin, smoke curled lazily from the dying fire while a man fought for breath in its flicker. Greyhawk Tanner lay half upright, bandaged in strips torn from Delilah's dress. The wound in his shoulder pulsed with slow defiance, his skin damp with fever. Delilah sat close beside him, eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Every few minutes, she dipped a rag in cool water and pressed it to his brow. The quiet between them felt sacred, like the space between thunder and its echo. You should rest, he murmured. I'll rest when you do, she answered softly. His gaze wandered to the window. The rain had thinned to a silver mist, the kind that made everything seem half-dreamed. Beyond the broken fence, Ghost grazed weakly in the field. The sight was steadying, as though some part of the world still obeyed the old laws of mourning. Storm's over, Greyhawk said, though his voice held no triumph. Delilah looked up, her hands stilling. You think it ends just because the sky cleared? He didn't answer. The truth was, he felt it too, the weight of unfinished danger pressing against the horizon. By mid-morning, a wagon appeared on the road. The horse was lathered, the man driving it slouched with exhaustion. He wore the dusty coat of the preacher Amos Burke, a face lined with both age and shame. Delilah saw him first and stepped outside, her heart a tight fist. Miss Vance, he greeted, voice hoarse. I came as soon as I heard. Is he alive? Barely, she said. What do you want, preacher? Burke removed his hat, water dripping from its brim. Word spreading. Sheriff Carson rode back into town saying the Apache devil tried to kill him. Folks are gathering at the church, some calling for blood. Delilah's voice turned sharp. You came to warn me or to see it done? The preacher flinched. I came to stop it if I can. Behind her, the cabin door creaked. Greyhawk stood there, pale but upright, rifle in one hand, the other pressed to his bandaged shoulder. You won't stop them, he said flatly. Fear's a fire. Once lit, it burns what's left of reason. Burke took a cautious step forward. Then let me stand with you. You stood by when they spit on my name for years, Greyhawk replied. Now you come to wash your conscience in my blood? Burke's lips trembled. I've sinned in silence. I won't again. Delilah moved between them, her voice trembling. Please, both of you. There's been enough fighting. Greyhawk looked at her then, something weary but tender behind his eyes. You don't understand. A man like me don't get to outlive his rumors. Then let me carry them with you, she whispered. The sound of distant hoofbeats cut the air. All three turned. Across the flat plain, a line of riders approached, torches in daylight, bright and angry. Lyle Carson rode at their head. Delilah's throat tightened. They're coming. Greyhawk checked the rifle, grimacing at the movement. Then we finish this. You can't fight all of them, she said. He looked out toward the riders. I don't aim to fight. I aim to end it. The preacher's hands shook. You step out there, they'll shoot you down. Greyhawk's tone was calm, final. Then I'll die standing. Delilah reached for him, gripping his arm. You don't have to prove anything. Not anymore. He turned to her, his gaze softening. You gave me peace when I'd forgotten what it felt like. Don't let them take that from you. She shook her head fiercely. If you go, I go. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Stubborn woman. And proud of it, she said, tears rising. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. The closeness felt like a prayer. Then he stepped back, lifting the rifle as the riders drew near. The men fanned out before the cabin, horses snorting, torches hissing in the damp air. Lyle dismounted, revolver already drawn. Morning, Tanner, he sneered. Heard you were dying. Thought I'd save the Lord the trouble. Grey Hawk stood tall despite the tremor in his legs. You'll find I'm not easy to bury. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Delilah. And you, still playing nurse to monsters? She didn't flinch. Better a monster with a heart than a man who's lost his soul. Lyle's smile vanished. You talk brave, girl. Let's see how long that lasts. He lifted the gun, aiming straight at Grey Hawk's chest. The world seemed to still, the rain hanging in midair, the horse's breath freezing to mist. Before the shot came, another sound split the quiet, the cock of a rifle from behind. Put it down, Carson. The preacher stood on the porch, rifle leveled, eyes burning with conviction long dormant. You spill one more drop of blood, and I'll send you to meet your maker myself. Lyle hesitated, surprise flashing in his face. You lost your mind, old man? Maybe, Burke said, voice steady. But I found my courage. Grey Hawk took a step forward, the barrel of his own rifle lowering. This ends here, Lyle. Not while I'm breathing, the sheriff hissed, raising his gun again. The shot rang out. It wasn't Grey Hawk's. Lyle staggered, disbelief cutting through his sneer. His revolver slipped from his hand as he crumpled into the mud, torch falling beside him. The flame hissed and died in the rain. A hush fell over the plains. The posse stared, some in shock, some in relief, as the preacher's rifle smoked faintly. Burke lowered it, his hands trembling. Lord forgive me. Grey Hawk's eyes met Delilah's. Neither spoke. The rain began again, softer this time, as if the sky itself was exhaling. Lyle Carson's men dismounted one by one, tossing their guns into the mud. The youngest of them, a boy who couldn't have been more than 20, removed his hat and looked at Grey Hawk. We didn't come for killing, he said quietly. We just wanted the truth. Grey Hawk's voice was hoarse. The truth's simple. I ain't your enemy. The boy nodded. No, sir. Not anymore. One by one they turned their horses and rode away, torches dwindling like tired stars. The preacher sank to his knees in the wet grass, weeping silently. Grey Hawk went to him, resting a heavy hand on his shoulder. You did what needed doing. Burke shook his head. No. I did what I should have done years ago. When the riders were gone, the three of them stood in the misty quiet, the dying storm curling around them like smoke from an extinguished fire. Delilah turned to Grey Hawk, voice barely a whisper. It's over. He looked toward the horizon, where the clouds were finally breaking, thin streaks of gold piercing through. It's never over. But it's enough. They walked back to the cabin together. The fire inside had burned low, its glow warm and human. Grey Hawk sat heavily by the hearth, exhaustion carving deep lines in his face. Delilah knelt beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. You kept your promise, she said softly. You didn't run. He looked at her, eyes bright with something between gratitude and sorrow. You gave me something worth standing for. The preacher rose behind them, hat in hand. What will you do now? Grey Hawk turned toward Delilah. Build, he said simply. Something new. Burke nodded, tears glinting in the firelight. Then maybe the Lord's mercy finally reached this place. When he left, the cabin fell quiet again. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, the air clean, reborn. Delilah leaned against Grey Hawk, her hand finding his. His pulse was steady now, strong beneath her fingers. You told me once love wasn't for men your age, she murmured. Still think that? He chuckled weakly. I said marriage wasn't. Love? He paused, eyes closing. Love's something different. It don't ask for youth. Just patience. She smiled through her tears. Then we've both waited long enough. He squeezed her hand, his voice low. Then let's stop waiting. Outside, the last of the storm broke open into sunlight, spilling gold across the wet fields. Ghost neighed softly in the distance. Grey Hawk rose with effort and stepped to the door, Delilah beside him. Together, they watched the light spread over the land, washing it clean. He turned to her, voice rough but tender. Maybe peace ain't quiet. Maybe it's just two souls finally done fighting the world. Delilah reached up, touching the scar at his shoulder. Then let's live loud enough to keep it. The wind carried the scent of rain and bread, and somewhere far off, the church bell began to ring, a sound not of mourning this time but of something born anew. Gray Hawk drew her close as the plains shimmered around them, the storm's memory fading into sunlight. For a moment, it felt as if the world itself had forgiven them both. And as the last raindrop fell, he whispered, "The rain's done chasing us, Delilah. Now it's just blessing what's left."